Grid Lions is a proud sponsor of Public Power Underground, a subsidiary of NextEra Energy and the leading transmission company in North America. Grid Lions is a transmission-only utility company that's more than just wires. With operations in 3 regional transmission organizations, Grid Lions works with electric cooperatives and municipal utilities to create collaborative solutions that integrate renewable energy and improve the reliability and resiliency of the electric grid. Learn more at gridliance.com. That's GRIDLIANCE.com.
We started in hard times to bring us all into the laughter through thick and through thin, for public power enthusiasts without and within. Roll on, enthusiasts, roll on. Roll on, enthusiasts, roll on.
Welcome to Public Power Underground, recorded in person at the Bonneville Power Administration's Rates Hearing Room after a Markets Plus Leadership Forum hosted by Tacoma Power, Bonneville Power Administration, and NV Energy. I'm Paul Dockery, the Creative Director and host of Public Power Underground and Senior Manager of Energy Resource Strategy and Planning for Seattle City Light. Joining me are 3 participants in the Leadership Forum to talk about our shared interest in market expansion and opportunities along the way. First up is Pam Sporborg, the Director of Transmission and Market Services at Portland General Electric. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Paul. It's really nice to be here.
Someone who actually listens to Public Power Underground, and I get to be on it. I'm very happy to have you.
I'm an avid listener.
Good. Joining Pam and I is Spencer Gray, the Executive Director of the Northwest and Intermountain Power Producers Coalition. Did I get it right?
Better known as NIPSI. That's
yes, right. Nailed it. Welcome, Spencer.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, good to have you. Good to be part of this conversation with independent power producers. It's going to be at a very important perspective.
Great to be here.
We're also joined by Joe Taylor, the Senior Director of Western Markets for Xcel Energy. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. I actually downloaded a few and listened to them on the plane.
Because you just learned about us.
Right, because I just learned about us because of your very, very recent invitation. So
yes,
glad to be here.
Thank you for saying yes. There was a little bit of pressuring to get to yes. And, we got to yes. And you aren't going to regret it. Trust us, right? He's not going to regret it.
That's what I understand.
I
was talking with I have a very intelligent stepdaughter who's finishing her 2nd year of college at Loyola. And she was telling me that she wrote a paper that she thought was horrible in her psychology class. And the professor was so enamored with it, she asked her to present it to a group of grad students. And so I said, Kendall, it's good to get out of your comfort zone. And this is a good example. And so I texted her yesterday about this, and I was like, I'm getting out of my comfort zone.
Oh, but it's going to be so comfortable.
She was proud of me.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you said yes. Yeah. It's going to be fun. It's going to be great. So I'm going to frame this up, and then we'll dig into it. So the Markets Plus Leadership Forum hosted regulators, key stakeholders, and leaders from the energy industry to discuss a vision for markets, to talk about market governance, and the Markets Plus approach to market policy and design. Our goal, and what we're trying to do here, is to debrief from that conversation, synthesize, distill, and reflect on the key issues facing market expansion in the West, and try to reflect what we heard today. And to make it all infotaining and not just a bunch of dry talking points. And I trust all of you to keep off the dry talking points, okay? Is that a fair? Are you ready for some infotaining?
Fair request, yeah.
Okay, it's a fair request. So it just so happens that the NBA's Western Conference Finals, or Western Conference Finals? Yeah. Western Conference Championship is probably the right way to say that.
I think we're at the semis still.
We're still at the semis, but it's guaranteed that the conference championship will have a team from California facing a team from the non-CAISO West. So the Denver Nuggets just won their semifinal series, and that team, the Denver Nuggets, will face either the Golden State Warriors or the Lakers. So we're going to attempt playoff analogies for all our topics. They're probably going to fall flat on their face, but it'll be fine. We're going to try to talk about 4 topics, for issues or areas of conversation. First, the benefits, opportunities, and barriers to market evolution. Second, long-run resource portfolios adapted to market design. try to make that wonky because it's fun. Third, reasons for skepticism still on market evolution in the West. And lastly, seams. The first topic are the benefits, opportunities, and barriers of market evolution. Public Power Underground has done a couple of episodes of sports analogies and how they relate to market evolution. In an episode with Carrie Simpson, the current director of Western Markets for SPP at the time at Xcel Energy, I don't know what her title was at that time.
It was virtually the same. I actually have the job she vacated when she went to SPP.
Okay, well, there you go. When she came on and she was in your role, she made the sports analogy about how transitioning from a bilateral market to a centrally dispatched market is like basketball teams going from pickup games to pros. Like that's like the transformational change when you change these markets. So I'm going to start with you, Pam, and go around the table. What are the benefits, opportunities, and barriers to going pro? And by going pro, I mean joining a regional market.
So thank you, Paul. So I want to stretch this metaphor, maybe challenge it quite a bit.
Please,
and
stretch
last
it,
night I
break
sat
it.
down with my husband and came up with a whole page of basketball metaphors to maybe weave into our conversation today.
Your metaphors are bulleted. Is that on
They
purpose?
are bulleted.
Yes.
Well, we have to cross out a couple, like lights out works for basketball, does not work for the utility industry. Also, here in the West, he's on fire.
Doesn't feel good.
Doesn't feel good.
Yeah,
so,
there's that one.
aside from those two, I have a full
But
page.
Heat check.
Heat check.
That
we
works?
can do that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we got
heat
a
check.
heat check. We're all heat checking in on our summer plans
Oh,
right
yes,
now.
we are. That's good.
So Carrie said, we're going pro right now. But
pro.
I would posit that we're a little bit like college basketball here in the West.
Okay.
We're, a little bit of hot shots, maybe a Cinderella every now and then. We like to play March Madness, where sometimes we get a little hot. Sometimes we get a double-double, which might be arbitraging Power X with BPA.
Oh.
I'd call that a double-double.
Okay. I love it. Let's keep going.
But I'd also say that getting to the Western EIM really is that first step in going pro. That we're effectively passing on energy and capacity or energy savings around the region. We're able to provide zone defense to enhance reliability. We're scoring points in the paint by accruing benefits to our customers in the millions of dollars. But what the RTO is going to the dream team. Where we're really able to take
Go into the Olympics
best
with
players,
yes.
put them onto one team, go for the gold.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is where we can select the most efficient big man to really get us, that base load generation. And maybe we've got some hot shot, flexible generation, some hydro, some gas, some renewables coming in to, shoot the deep threes on the outside, on the perimeter. We've got some really great point guards who come and provide the regulation service, some specific power players who can really get in there and get specific skills onto the court.
Good six-man kind of thing. Yeah, role
Exactly,
player.
role players.
Yeah, good
Some
role
really
player.
good role players. And
Yep.
we're able to choose the best of those role players from around the region because an RTO really provides us with that optimization of all the types of services, not just energy and flexibility, but the ancillary services. We can optimize capacity, and we can really move the region's green energy around from where it's being generated through the transmission system. I don't quite have a metaphor there, but we can use the transmission system, maybe the infrastructure, the coaches, and get it to where the load centers are. And so I think we are going pro right now. We've leveled up from college basketball to the pros, but our next step really is getting to the dream team.
Okay, so your hypothesis is the EIM got us to a farm team in the pros or something.
Yeah.
We're and one of the things she pointed out, and one of the reasons this analogy kind of worked is you get a lot more transparency around your pricing. You get more transparency around how resources interact and understand how your flows of power is in a market. And we're getting some of that with the EIM. It does beg the question of what's your farm league? What's your how are your new resources coming in? Where are you recruiting from? We got Nipsey here to talk a little bit about that. Anything about today that spoke to, because some of what you spoke to is like this diversity benefit of you're getting the best players from and using their attributes, using the role player skills. Is there anything from like the independent power producer's perspective that a RTO provides an opportunity for?
I always try to start conversations like this with a compliment for an IOU. So the most entertaining thing I've seen today so far is Pam's incredible versatility with basketball metaphors.
It's good.
It's almost like I forget the name of the guy who does the Dr. Seuss hip hop on. He's got a YouTube channel.
I don't
Fox
know
on
about
Socks.
this.
Greatest
what is it?
YouTube clip of the last, several years.
Okay.
Yeah, look it up. He raps Fox on Socks and kills it. And some other Dr. Seuss too. You're right there.
I'll take the compliment.
Yeah.
But I will object to the idea that we're just mired here in college basketball.
Ooh.
I tend to think we're more like the NBA 30 years ago. You've got a post player. It's a slower game. There's a couple teams that run a triangle, offense, and they're quite good. But
This was exactly my point when Carrie did this. This was my opening pitch. It's like it's comparing players across genres when you compare bilateral to an organized market. Keep going. No,
it's not fair to the Bill Russells of the world to make that comparison quite. So the number of possessions is up now. The spacing is different now. The three-point shot has changed the game. So I think the move to organized markets for the West is more like the shift. Maybe the Phoenix Suns started it 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And the Warriors, who happen to be my favorite team, really encapsulate that approach now. So it's more spacing, it's faster paced, it's more complex offenses, it's driving to the basket and kicking out. And I think that speed and complexity of the game now is more reflective of where we're headed.
Okay, so in the room today, and I'll just pivot to you, Joe, and we can turn away from the sports analogy if you're ready, or if you want to talk about golf, that's fine. But like part of what we're hearing, right, is the game has changed. It got faster. We do need this diversity of resources to achieve our goals, and a diverse footprint helps us do that. I think we heard that today. Anything else that you heard today that talks to like the benefits of this, the barriers that we still have to overcome, and the opportunities left available to us?
I think on the benefit side, to get really to the dream team is the footprint's got to be as big as it can be, and then you have to solve hurdles that we have. I know it's not a basketball term, but we have a lot of geology between us and the rest of the West.
That's a good way of putting
difficult to build through to truly be able to take advantage of the East-West and even the North-South diversity. So that's going to be a challenge for folks on my side of the interconnection. I think that's the primary thing I think of when I think of this.
What? So that is one of the kind of questions that you talk about, a footprint in the West that would include the Mountain West with the Pacific Northwest or the Southwest. You have to think a lot about what that transmission connectivity is. Anything anybody heard today about that transmission being a barrier to this footprint, or any hope around solving those type of barriers that you heard today or want to reflect on?
What I hear, and I've heard it for the past few months, including in some studies that my company's engaged in, is Northwest to Southwest.
Okay.
The diversity benefits of being able to trade more Northwest to Southwest and Southwest to Northwest because of the different peaking seasons and the solar in the Southwest and the hydro in the Northwest is really, I think, going to be the focus, especially if the Northwest and the Southwest end up being in the same market. That transmission development, I think, will really kick off because we formed that team, right, to do it together.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more if you have more thoughts, Pam or Spencer, about the benefits for the future pipeline. Like, I want to come back a little bit to that pipeline of if you have the dream team, they do get older. those players get older, and even if they aren't older, I think specifically for our energy transition, we're going to need more players. And talking a little bit about that, given a bigger footprint and that opportunity, maybe.
Maybe I'll touch on a little bit of what Chris Robinson was talking about with just the massive undertaking that this is really the biggest transformation since we first electrified the grid, or first created the grid. And that as we're really looking to decarbonize and add additional energy sources like heating and transportation to our portfolios so that we can have a decarbonized economy, that the widest area is really critical for being able to achieve those goals. Having the most diversity possible, desert Southwest solar, Pacific Northwest hydro, Wyoming wind, Montana wind. Our IRP is looking at all of these diverse resources as really the crucial building blocks to getting us to our 80% decarbonization target by 2030. And we need even more as we get to 100% by 2040.
Having a grid that's bigger than the weather, is that how I've heard that phrase before? Making sure that you have a big enough footprint that single storm. And maybe you can't anymore because some of these weather patterns seem to cross the whole country. Spencer, any thoughts on pipeline?
Well,
the talent pipeline to the pros?
I'll go back to the Dream Team because I'm nervous about the Warrior-Laker game tonight, which may have happened before this podcast comes out, by the time it comes out. So I get such joy out of watching Steph Curry dominate a game that the idea of him aging out of the NBA is hard to take.
Yeah.
But to be realistic, I don't feel like we as market participants and stakeholders and regulators have a common understanding yet of where the real pinch points are for transmission to make the market footprints work. I think intuitively we understand it. Perhaps the utilities have a better understanding, and Bonneville as transmission owners. But we talk a little bit around that issue. The north-south connectivity, there's only a couple entities who are in that location. East-west, at least on the northern tier of the interconnection, same thing, only a couple entities there. NIPSI certainly has some merchant transmission developers. Maybe that's ultimately a solution for some of this, but the power flows really matter. The amount of load in the market footprint matters. And I hope we can have more kind of common data and understanding of who is in those swing positions as transmission owners to help determine the footprint. Not assuming that's fixed, though, as we've talked about, but it just takes so long to build transmission that's not there's no like elasticity of transmission we can count on here to get built to go outside of a basketball metaphor. Is that a basketball metaphor?
Elasticity of transmission? I'll give it to you.
Thank you.
Well, I think we at least framed up a lot of the topics that got talked about today. I'll go to the next one, and it probably is a little too wonky, and we can make it less wonky with great metaphors that Pam will bring to us. I want to talk about like the evolution of the grid and the ways market rules can change the portfolio of resources, whether power resources or transmission assets, you could reasonably expect to be developed in light of them. So I recently had Dr. Conley Byers on the podcast, and I was reflecting on that conversation since then. And she had this concept, and she noted that resources end up getting signaled to enter or exit the market dependent on market design choices. And it's like into my head from her saying it, this long run resource mix adapted to market design. So to compare it to sports, like you were talking, Spencer, about how basketball has evolved over the years with new offenses, new defenses, and you get like Steph Curry wouldn't have been a player that got into the pros in a prior era. You're getting these new players who have formed their skill and add to the value of basketball because of the way the game has evolved. And they've evolved the rules of the game to make sure that the game has stayed enjoyable to fans, just like the grid needs to evolve to stay beneficial for its customers, okay? So I'll start with you, Spencer. You got the Steph Curry analogy here. Is basketball getting more entertaining for fans? Are they successful in evolving those rules? And by that, I mean, are centrally dispatched markets going to change resource portfolios in the long run once resource portfolios have adapted to market rules?
And by that, I mean, I think basketball has become more entertaining. I enjoy less where the game is dominated by someone who's just huge and can plow over competitors. It looks, maybe it looks more like football. Steph Curry is about my height. He looks like a dwarf on the court, and he gives everybody a dream that maybe they could make the pros. So maybe that's a part of it.
That is a part of it.
For the markets themselves, I take that point. I think it's a good point that the market design helps determine which resources are entered into the market or certainly deployed. I think some of that discussion in organized markets has centered recently around how capacity market designs affect resource decisions most fundamentally for actually investing in a new resource and deciding it could earn a return in a market. And I think that is an approach that we, as a region, as an interconnection, are likely to avoid. And we, in a way, we kind of have the luxury of avoiding it because we don't have the lack of a procurement direction from the states that PJM, New York, and New England have had. So what I think is kind of maybe a better or more precise way to describe how IPPs anticipate markets affecting resource selection. The decision by a handful of Western states, maybe half of the 11 Western states, to have aggressive decarbonization goals is going to be the most determining factor. But the markets can, and the fact that most of the states have a lot of load too.
Yeah.
And so what I would expect is the market design affects more how transparent and strong the price signals are for transmission congestion, and where building new generation resources makes the most sense. So it sort of shuffles those investments around to the most optimal places would be the economic theory, more than kind of predetermining the type of generation that you're building.
Yeah, I really want to get into that, but I probably shouldn't go any deeper. But I do think the insight that the locational aspects of where to put generation is one of the areas that that market design will really impact, and it's something we should pay attention to. I also, like, if we're planning for the 30 years from now, thinking about long term, also having that regional transmission organization to help establish the transmission infrastructure and how those resources get deployed, also very important. I'll turn to you, Pam, if you want to add any thoughts around like the importance of market design to make sure it's sending the right signals.
So I think I really agree with Spencer that I think public policy is building a full court press on renewables that is boxing out some of our traditional generation.
Oh, this is good.
Are you here every Friday night?
But what market design really can do is set up a pick and roll offense so that these two types of generators can work together.
Okay.
And that we can ensure the right price signals to our more traditional generation while allowing the nimbleness and the variability of the newer generation to serve load when it's available. And so I really do think that we need the market design approaches that value the kinds of things that our traditional generators provide, while also allowing the new resources to come online to meet our public policy objectives.
No, preparation. I can tell preparation. It's
my
beautiful.
list.
It's a great list.
I owe my husband.
I'd say Pam's like the Miami Heat of this table. How's that?
Well, we'll take it. It's like a
skilled.
Yeah.
See, all of your actual references go right over my head.
I'll pivot to you, Joe. One of the things we heard today was somebody said, like, anybody can design a market. It's like, and I think Russ said it in his panel. He said it elsewhere. Russ Manifelt from Bonneville, that a lot of market design is pretty standard. And one of the questions I'll just throw out there is do we expect any fundamental differences in what you would expect a long-run portfolio mix from market design related to SPP's Markets Plus to be different from the CAISO EDAM market design? Is there an expectation that you would end up with if you were following the academic researchers' model of energy markets and how they can impact resource entrance and exit decisions? Is there anything different there that you think we would expect different outcomes from those two market designs?
Well, I'm hoping and it's a group I'm working on for Markets Plus, the transmission working group, that we can come up with a design that really frees up the transmission system, so that we're not we don't have our hands tied by contract path world and not being able to fully utilize transmission when it's not even flowing because of scheduling limits and things like that, and to price that out to where the market it doesn't impact generators' offers or loads bids. Right, it's simply an uplift charge that's very manageable and hopefully very inexpensive.
Okay,
I think that's the primary thing. The item I don't have any experience with, but seems extremely complicated, is the GHG stuff. With Washington having its own set of rules, and really the rest of the West engaged in Markets Plus really doesn't have those rules. But I think the Washington paradigm is going to kind of control that whole conversation around GHG.
Can we, if it's fair, talk a little bit about greenhouse gas and those rules? Because I do think that's one of the elements. It's because anytime you have a grid that spans large enough to be bigger than the weather, it will include more than one jurisdiction and governance, right? It's going to include more than one state. And anytime you have more than one state, you're probably going to have different policy goals and implementation of policies that get passed through the governance structure of that state. Can we talk a little bit, before we get to SEAMS, about how those market rules will end up playing together? Do we have hope that there is a way to have a Western market that can reflect the priorities of the individual states, but still get us to a reasonably dispatched solution for a security constrained unit commitment? And I'm looking at you, Pam. Give me some hope.
So I think one of the challenges that we all recognize is that markets are one of the best tools we have to decarbonize. However, each state has jurisdiction over decarbonization within their state boundaries and the resource mix for their own state. And as we see different approaches to these greenhouse gas compliance programs or cap and trade programs, that those state rules create friction within the market that create more challenges for the market to do what it does best if given the right economic price signal to drive a decarbonized outcome. So I think we have a lot of work to do to get some alignment around what we want from our market and whether we really want the market to be a tool to drive decarbonization or whether we want the market to be a tool to implement state policy. And I think we have to find a way to harmonize to get to the right outcome there.
Well said. Anything you want to add, Spencer?
It just seems to me that the nature of the physical flows on any grid mean that any greenhouse gas accounting system, if there is any discrepancy in the jurisdiction of the grid itself and the policy requirements to decarbonize, you're just having to pick an approximation of what's actually physically occurring. And the degree of your acceptance and tolerance of that approximation is a policy decision. Your state laws may preclude you from making some of those decisions, but it's always going to be a proxy. And that's just something we have to get comfortable with to keep those overlays together.
Talking about overlays is a great pivot to seams, but did you want to get on that before we pivot to seams, Joe, or are you ready?
No, I'm good. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's use the great pivot, because the understanding transmission connectivity is an important part of your seams issues. So, I actually skipped a middle topic that we'll come back to at the end, but that was too good of a pivot to miss it. So, the NBA Finals is a competition between the Eastern Conference champion and the Western Conference champion. Not all brackets sort that way. There are other ways to set up a bracket. You can just rank them from best to worst, like they do it in the college March Madness. There's this proposal for the NBA Finals where the best team can pick their first round opponent. Have you heard this yet, Spencer? Zach Lowe does it on his podcast, The Lowe Post, talks about it every once in a while. It's a great thing. That's all to say that the Eastern and Western division of the NBA is a seam. And it's a choice that you get to make, and it ends up with some inefficiencies, and you can say sometimes the finals doesn't have the two best teams. So I think I want to come to you, Spencer, and talk about whether you like brackets that pit that rank the best team to the worst team in the bracket, or if you want to do something more like the Eastern and West Conference. And by that, I mean, what complications do seams play in Western market development?
So first of all, you should try to get Zach Lowe in some way on this podcast, because that would be a fun interview.
It would be an awesome interview.
Yeah.
I think I'm really flattered that you think I can pull that off, Spencer. I'm just super flattered.
I'll back you up. You up if it helps. And I'm also thinking through the complication of the analogy with
very complicated
modern
analogy.
Free agency. And so
yes,
if we
I
can
almost did the free agency one.
If we can think for a minute about what an NBA free agent represents now, maybe it is a very talented IPP who shows up in your market and has a bunch of great development plans and kind of kills it, finds the best places to build things, knows how to market better than anybody else, and changes the market in that respect and making it more optimal. You could also think of a free agent maybe as one of the large transmission owners who are load-serving entities, I guess with the exception of the PMAs, who are operating at the wholesale level, who change the competitive nature of your market footprint by choosing to go one way or another.
Okay.
And so that's probably operating a little more in I guess it works for a seam for Marcus Plus versus EDAM. Having Pacific Corp or NV Energy or Idaho Power, really important transmission connectors in the interconnection, elect to go to one team or the other is, the difference between LeBron going to the Lakers or staying with the Cavaliers or going to the Warriors. And that's a really fundamental part of the competitive landscape, I think, that's,
Did you say fun part of the competitive landscape?
Fundamental.
Fundamental, okay.
Maybe there's some fun in there too, but that is, I guess, what the folks I represent who primarily own generation and sell it on a competitive basis have to watch what counterparties are going where, both for the transmission service that they need as transmission customers, but also as buyers of what they're selling. And so the seam matters operationally, of course, selling from within one BA to another BA who's in a different market. We are trying to get our heads around how that would work mechanically. But sort of apart from that, needing to keep active in both market conversations as we watch our counterparties who are vertically integrated in the other parts of their business is a big part of our task.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know that it fits with either analogy, whether it's the Eastern Western Conference or the players moving, but the transmission implications of those seams. And if you have one major transmission owner committed to a market, the complications of how to manage congestion. One of the questions I'll ask you, Joe, you're on the transmission work group, right? Which worker? Yeah, it's transmission worker. Chair of the markets plus transmission worker.
Yes,
there
indeed.
we go. One of the questions I had was around congestion management within the market, and whether when you have a seam like a Pacificor or that may not be that is not in the markets plus footprint is going to be in the EDAM footprint, how that can change your solution for congestion within the footprint.
Oh, it absolutely will change the solution, because if the market solution is to generate east of Pacificorp and deliver west of Pacificorp, getting through Pacificorp and reaching an agreement with Pacificorp that's different than, okay, go ahead and reserve transmission 40 minutes in advance for an hour and do the normal OASIS and tagging and all of that stuff. It will just keep that market solution from happening.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was talking about on the panel today is, seams are, it's not a peace treaty like I've heard said in a meeting last month, but it's also, I don't think it's the thing that you put off until, a year from now or 2 years from now. I think it's important. The RTOs in the East have worked together for decades and written joint operating agreements, and they're constantly revising those and in some cases going in front of FERC. It's a difficult situation. Nobody wants their transmission to get used without getting compensated, and that's what the primary seams problem is going to be in the West, with two markets that aren't completely, they've got some holes in the middle of them that are in the other market, or maybe not in any market whatsoever. So it's certainly not as perfect a solution as one contiguous footprint.
Yeah. Pam, did you want to get in on the seams issue or?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that seams in the West today are a little bit of a jump ball, and that with 38 balancing authorities, you made this point. 38 balancing authorities. If we get down to 2, we would move from 38 to maybe more one-on-one type play.
Oh, okay. Nice.
That's the end of my metaphors. But I also think it's important to remember that seams agreements cover more than just economic transactions between markets. They cover loop flow management, congestion management, the pricing of that congestion management, and transmission usage across different markets. And so I think it's important to recognize, as you pointed out, that in the East, these negotiations have taken years, sometimes decades, to resolve. I remember sitting next to my poor colleague at FERC who had to work on Lake Erie loop flow that did not get resolved during his tenure at FERC, nor during my tenure at FERC. I believe it took a full 10 years to resolve Lake Erie loop flow through seams agreements between MISO, NISO, PJM, and ISO New England, as well as some Canadian entities. I think we've seen challenges with the SPP MISO integrate, or the Intergy integration into MISO that SPP referenced today, where that seams agreement, the negotiations ended up going to FERC with several rounds of complaint, a court case, another round at FERC. So I think it's important that while, yes, the East has gotten to a point where these seams have been negotiated and agreed to and are functioning well in a way that enables different ISOs to help each other out with reliability and economic transactions, that getting there is going to be a challenge for the West, and that we have a significant road ahead of us before we get from 38 to 2 seams, and then to get a functioning seams agreement between our 2 one-on-one players.
Yeah, and just for context, those agreements, I think I heard it called a joint operating agreement, is what some of the entities in the Eastern Interconnect use to document those seams agreement. And they're more than economic, is what I'm learning from you. It's a lot more than that.
They're even developing into agreements to manage interconnection queues for projects around in between the 2 RTOs, because the power generated by a new generator, 50 miles away between 2 RTOs is going to flow between them. So, and there's like MISO and SPP have this JTIQ, Joint Transmission Interconnection Queue, I think it's called, process. And the goal is simply to get a win. Let's find a couple of mid-priced solutions that solve a lot of problems right at the seam and related to the generator interconnections, so that each of them can speed up their queues and get some solutions that that are acceptable to the other RTO on the other side of that seam.
I hadn't even thought about all of this. This is fun for me to think about. I love thinking about this stuff. I hadn't thought about the implications of your interconnection process on the seams, and the fact that when you have two transmission owners and you're interconnecting, your project can have impacts on that other. I hadn't even thought about that around the seams issues. But we deal with that 38 times today, right? And
Correct.
if you get to 2, that'll be so much better. There's the hope. There's the opportunity, right? Is that right, Spencer?
Yeah,
There's hope and opportunity there?
Well, it also kind of sharpens the possibility of the West having a greater focus on interregional transfer capacity in the way that the RTOs and ISOs do now. We have, in our view, fairly weak transmission planning institutions, in large part by design in the West. And the considerations for interregional planning for transmission, there aren't the right institutions and compliance mechanisms in the West outside of the CAISO that are being heavily debated in front of FERC for the other market operators in the East. But if you do end up with 2 and they have transmission functions, I think it would end up highlighting wherever that seam is, highlight that issue that's maybe not come to the fore as much in the West as it has in the rest of the country. Also, I was wondering, the Lake Erie loop flow, I think that is like a Toronto Raptors counter to a box and one defense.
Yeah.
It's old basketball lore.
Sure. That sounds about right.
That'd be a great name for a defense for a professional basketball team. Probably for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
That makes sense.
That would make sense.
Lake Erie loop flow.
In Lake Erie loop flow defense. Okay, so I think we can pivot to outstanding reasons for skepticism about market evolution. So Zach Lowe, this podcast host, the Low Post, they talk a lot about in basketball that when you get to the playoffs in a 7-game series, when you have fairly evenly matched teams, you get to the point of the season, the series where all the tricks are out of the bag, and it's about you know what offense is going to work and what defense they're going to play. It's kind of all out on the table, and it's just about execution. It seems like this market conversation is well scoped, I would say. Feels like we've been talking about markets for a long time. We've gotten to the point where it feels like all of the hairs on the dog. I don't know what a great analogy is for this. The warts are out. We know what markets are good for and not good for. So I want to talk a little bit about what the reason for skepticism is, and I'm going to start with you, Joe. So what makes you skeptical about the Denver Nuggets pulling off a championship this year? And by that, what are the outstanding areas of skepticism you have in market evolution in the West?
Well, not being a big basketball fan, but the Nuggets came into the playoffs very highly ranked, always the favorites. Yep. Much like I think in this room today, SPP and Marcus Plus came to this room as the favorites, right?
Ooh, hot take.
I think obstacles are several. Some of the obstacles I hear about and deal with are loss of control. So when we go into Marcus Plus, we're not going to the dream team, right? We're going into, maybe a mid-tier NBA team. The dream team is really where the transmission is also controlled. It's cost allocated. There are rules and fantastic interregional planning processes that identify what needs to get built and how it's going to get paid for. And so how it's going to get paid for is huge. From a utility perspective, obviously you want to build and get paid for it, and you don't want to pay for what you didn't build. So that paranoia is nationwide. I've heard that for the last 20 years. Is who's going to pay for the transmission. What you hear from the states, what the regulated utilities hear from the states, is that they're going to lose control over resource planning and over transmission siting, which you look east and look at the RTOs that are in states that haven't, is using the term deregulated, which is not right.
Yeah.
But that allow retail competition. Restructured, yes. The states that have not restructured, there has been there's no impact to the state's right to choose what resources it orders its utilities to build or buy from Spencer's folks, for example. And the states still have all the siting that is in their statutes for transmission. Where they lose the control is that the RTO is determining what needs to get built, and then going through the state. The utility having to sponsor and go through the state when it didn't come directly from the utility's homegrown transmission planning process. That's it.
I'm sure you got more. We'll come back to you when you think more. We got plenty, maybe not plenty of time, but plenty of space for you. Joe, plenty of space. Pam, what do you think are the outstanding issues? What are the unknowns that still keep you up at night?
There are plenty of unknowns that keep me up at night, but I do agree. I think the biggest challenge that could cause our progress towards an RTO to foul out would be if any one of the major transmission providers in the West chooses to not form a common transmission tariff.
Yeah.
I don't even know that we have to be in an RTO, but that common tariff, especially as some of the largest transmission providers are also, larger transmission system, more expensive, that you end up with the kind of pancaked rate that would really prevent the economic benefits from the energy market dispatch to be realized because you're significantly increasing your transmission costs. So I think that the pump fake on regional market development.
See, you weren't done.
might be.
That was a pump fake earlier.
Yeah.
Might be transmission. Although I do think we have other barriers around jurisdiction, getting governance right, assuring equity in governance. I think, if we are progressing towards more of the voting structure, that ensuring that a diverse group of utilities still have a voice when we do have several very large players in the region, that IPPs and our NGO communities have a voice in that process that is proportionate to their appropriate influence. I think these are the kinds of components where it's going to be very challenging to get right if we really are to move beyond the Markets Plus or the day ahead time frame and get really into that full RTO.
I mean, this has been a great couple of years to contrast with market conversations maybe 10 or 15 years ago in the West. There are many fewer. It's actually hard to find voices who are hard against regionalizing markets more. I guess where I have some skepticism is not that we're going to take another step as a region, or parts of the region will, into day-ahead markets as a natural evolution from the EIM, but we're backing our way into the suite of functions that market operators elsewhere perform that, at least for non-transmission owners, are really fundamental to the value proposition.
Okay.
Day-ahead market's great for consumers. It's going to optimize flows better. It will dispatch resources better. It'll be a better system overall. But from the commercial model for IPPs and marketers, and I think this is true to some extent for some transmission-dependent utilities too, until you have an actual independent consolidated set of functions for transmission service, transmission planning, you're leaving so much on the table. And so I guess I worry that we may have too many incumbents who, at the end of the day, won't want to surrender control together over that suite of functions. And part of what complicates that is everybody's kind of bringing their own refs to the table. The referees that the three of us operate under is quite different from Public Power's model of being more masters of their own fate. We have both state regulators that the IOUs are more directly affected by than the non-regulated competitive participants. And then we also have FERC. And so that we've managed to avoid that becoming a killer issue over resource adequacy recently. And I think the whole region sort of should mull how we got to that point and avoided that becoming a governance issue that did away with resource adequacy. But RA is the kind of thing where if you do mess it up, you have blackouts and you have political fallout that's probably not present in driving us toward organizing the markets further. So on that point, that's the other risk I guess I see, is a political risk that there is some extreme weather event. We are really short on capacity. A transmission line burns up. Some key state or constituency gets really mad about the grid having been messed up, because we're still very much living with this series of events that happened around 2000. The generation of elected officials who got mad about how the grid was being run, ran for office and are still in office around the region in different positions, which is not to say anything about the policy views of elected officials on how we're running the grid. But we should just all take that political risk seriously in the West, because it's I guess burnt us before.
Yeah, well said. And that political risk, I think the risk of extreme events is probably more acute than it ever has been, especially here in the West. I felt like we've run through a lot of topics. I wanted to close out with some like final thoughts and get to any other themes you heard today that we haven't covered yet. Basically, and we'll start with you, Pam. Who do you think's going to win? Who do you think's going to be in the Western Conference Finals, and who do you think's going to win the Western Conference Finals? And by that I mean, any takeaways from today that you'd want to carry forward?
Okay. Well, I want Spencer to have a great afternoon. So I'm, hope the Warriors can pull out a win.
Yeah. I'm a little skeptical of the Warriors actually making it past the Lakers. I'm sorry, man.
I mean, I do
it's
appreciate Steph Curry. I watched him in college at Davidson and admired his tenacity. And it's great to kind of see that kind of tenacity and scrappiness come through in the NBA in a successful way.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe I don't know that there has to be a winner. No. I think we will have two markets in the West. And I think that, as Barbara pointed out, we all win with choice. And that each utility, I think we're all uniquely situated. We all have unique transmission needs. We're all differently positioned in the grid. And that positioning means that the benefits for our customers are different depending on the different market footprints. And so I think as we start to see some of these decisions maybe happening at a buzzer beater, that those benefits will become more clear, and that we can look to which footprint and which transmission connectivity is to which market is going to make sense for our customers. And I think, for PGE, that benefit to customers is really that primary driver. We would like to see, the financial and reliability markets, the reliability that markets bring accrue to our customers. We'd like to see a market that can truly help us meet our decarbonization goals. And that as we, explore our options and evaluate the two market choices, those are going to be the principles that drive us.
Well said. well summarized of some of the topics and a lot of topics we heard about today. I'll pivot to you, Spencer. Anything you wanted to bring out from the conversation today that we haven't gotten to yet? Synthesis or distillation?
Boy, I'm nervous about saying something about the Warriors tonight. If listeners are listening to this later, I have to ride with them. But maybe a bigger point is that, over time, dynasties in professional sports are teams that have a lot of talent, are coached well, have a lot of role players who fill roles in excellent form in the playoffs. There's a lot of factors and some luck that come together to create not just a champion in one given year, but multiple times over time. And maybe maybe we're stretching this analogy to the breaking point, but
that's fun.
For the two markets that we seem to be headed toward, that sort of success over time in competition with other teams, where you sometimes lose in the short term and learn some lessons and adjust. It just seems like a very much undecided issue still, with some key players yet to show where their commercial interest lies, and what their physical assets would contribute to a regional grid in a way that would be different from today. So I think for most of us, that means we lack the market heft to just make a decision and go with it. There are a few players who have that ability and the interconnection, but it compels the rest of us to participate in a couple of different forums and side discussions like this to figure out where we're going.
Side discussions like this that are getting recorded and will get published on a podcast app.
Long-lived side discussions.
Long-lived side discussions, absolutely. Joe, I'll pivot to you. You kind of get the closing thoughts about takeaways from today, or your message about why the Denver Nuggets are going to win not only the Western Conference championship, but also the finals.
Well, I think
not to oversell it. I thought it was fun. You're from Colorado, and Denver's in the finals.
Right. Feeling good about the Nuggets. They struggled halfway through this series, and then came back. Stuart, I hope your Warriors are in. I do like them. I do like especially Steph Curry, and I'll point out, as a non-basketball analogy, because I'm a golfer, Steph's an excellent golfer.
Yes.
And so, when he ages out and he's got to retire, he puts in a few years of practice, and we might see him again. We might see him on TV anyway. So he's an excellent player.
Transferable skills,
Yes.
Like,
even if there are two markets in the West, a market engine running and the market operator having a scale view over his system increases the visibility. It from a real-time basis, having one entity looking out over these multiple systems does increase the visibility. That market operator can troubleshoot solutions that the separate BAs couldn't, because they can't see each other's systems. So I think regardless if there's one or two, at least on the short-term reliability, I think will be improved. I've always felt that way. So I think that is something that is always going to be a benefit of markets, even beyond the value of to our customers from day ahead in real time. So I think there is a reliability play in there that will always be there if we can bring a market out here to the West. And then kind of switching gears on the resource side, the portfolio of resources we're using to meet our capacity requirements is changing so quickly. And I heard a panelist today talk about, I think it was Doug Cannon, the more solar you add, the less valuable the next megawatt is.
Yeah.
And we, our big three now are solar, wind, and batteries. What we're going to start
and hydro. Don't forget hydro.
Okay, that's right. From the dry part of the West, yeah. But the use of tools that are out here already now that don't depend on what market we're in, like surplus interconnections, we're going to see batteries and PV panels installed on the downstream side of our wind farms, and be able to optimize all three using the same transmission capacity. So you don't actually have to build new transmission. You may add 3 times the nameplate capacity behind that transmission line, and the market can solve and dispatch those 3 sets of generation, including a storage component right in the battery, all at the same time. And it's back to a prior question about, the market rules really matter. We're dealing with that in the organized markets now, but it's brand new. This concept of, if I've got a 100 megawatt interconnection right, and I've got 300 megawatt projects behind it, I can only run 100 megawatts at once, and all 3 projects want to bid into the market, or offer into the market, I'm sorry.
That seems like a non-convex pricing problem, actually. That was a callback to a prior episode.
Okay. But I think I'll leave it there. I always have to make my pitch for being flexible and putting stuff behind the fence of your generators, so that you can optimize the system better and not have to build new transmission lines for every new generator. So that's it.
It was a good pitch, yeah. Nobody asked for my thoughts, but I'm going to give them anyway. How about this? So one of the messages I heard today that really resonated with me is to think about and plan for what you want in the long term from your market design. That really resonated with me. And we talked a lot today about having diversity of resource mix, diversity of a large footprint so that your footprint can be larger in the weather. I also think it's important to make sure you have a diversity of load. And one of the key things that I've learned in going through this exercise of interviewing a bunch of really smart people is the importance of price responsive demand in the to meet decarbonization goals and within deep electrification of our economy. So I think that today's conversation had a lot of great. It was another great step on the way to a market evolution. And this was a very fun conversation. And I hope you all feel valued and appreciated. And Joe, do you feel valued and appreciated?
I do, except I kept calling Spencer Stewart.
Yeah, I'm glad you got it at the end.
Oh,
I'm glad you got it at the end.
I apologize.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm so sorry.
I go by many names.
Yeah.
I'm wondering why he wasn't smiling at me when I looked over at him.
Spencer, do you feel valued and appreciated now that he's acknowledged your name?
I'm fully valued and appreciated.
Good. And Pam, do you feel seen, heard, and valued and appreciated?
I do feel seen, heard, and valued, especially by Spencer and his recognition of my wonderful use of metaphors.
Impressive. You belong not just on the Redeem team, but the Dream team.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you all. Public Power Underground is a co-production of News Data and Seattle City Light. You don't have to be subscribed to News Data to get the podcast, but it sure makes the podcast make a lot more sense. Public Power Underground for electric utility enthusiasts. Public Power Underground, it's work to watch.
Enthusiasts roll on. Roll on, enthusiasts, roll on. Your power's the subject of public power news. Roll on, enthusiasts, roll on.
Public Power Underground is a production of Seattle City Light and News Data. The views expressed are your own and not the official views of Seattle City Light, Tacoma Power, News Data, or the organization of the guests also appearing on Public Power Underground. Public Power Underground is electric utility and electric utility adjacent news from a power department's perspective. Today's episode was written and produced by Paul Dockery and Almaz Nagesh, and it's edited and published by the stellar team at Pioneer Utility Resources, with sound mixing by Lucas Smith and video editing by Brendan Delzer. Our theme song, Roll On Enthusiast, was rewritten, performed, and recorded by Aaron Guillory and Ian Bledsoe. You don't have to be subscribed to News Data's weekly newsletters to get this podcast, but it sure makes the podcast make a lot more sense. Public Power Underground for electric utility enthusiasts. Public Power Underground, it's work to watch.